In forgotten corners of Asia, beneath candle wax and chanting smoke, linger stories that were never meant to be heard aloud. Whispers passed from monk to monk, from grandmother to fire, from silence to shadow. This is one of them. You are listening to Whispers of Asia, where the dead do not always rest and the living are not always safe. Tonight, we bring you a tale rooted in the sacred soil of Thailand, where temple bells guide wandering souls to the next life. But what happens when the bell rings twice? This is the story of a soul that would not leave, and the cursed sound that summoned it back. Let the chanting begin.
The temple stood quiet at the edge of the rice paddies, where the land dipped gently into a bowl of mist. From the road, Wat Nong Sai looked like any other village temple, its roof arched in red clay tiles, its walls painted with fading images of lotus blooms and golden Buddha eyes that watched from the mural's flaked edges. But those who lived nearby never passed it at night, not after the bell rang twice. There was only one bell at Wat Nong Sai, hung beneath the east pavilion. It had no rope, no ringer. Only monks, dressed in saffron and silence, were allowed to strike it, and only during funerals. One toll for each soul. That was the rule. One clean, solemn ring as the smoke rose from the cremation pyre. The bell had not rung in weeks, until the night Mali died. She was young, too young, 21, just beginning to speak of marriage and distant cities. She died in the water, they said. A small boat overturned in the dark, and her lungs filled with silt. Some whispered of a suicide. Others said it was the river spirit who took her. But all agreed on one thing. Her body was pulled from the water with her hair spread like roots, her eyes still open. The monks held the funeral within 2 days. The mother wept through every chant. Incense curled like breath around the coffin. The dogs howled when the fire was lit. And when the final words were spoken, a monk walked across the stone path to the bell. He bowed. He raised the wooden striker, and the bell rang once. The sound echoed across the temple grounds, a low vibration that passed through the soil and hung in the trees. Villagers standing by the gate bowed their heads, palms pressed together, whispering Mali's name. The fire crackled louder. Then, as the flames licked higher, the bell rang again. No one had touched it. No monk stood near. It rang clean and cold, as if someone else had struck it from within. For a long moment no one moved. The abbot's face stiffened like dry paper. Children clung to their mothers, dogs whimpered and backed away from the cremation ground. The bell had never rung twice, not in the memory of the elders, not even during the flood season, when whole families were cremated in the same week. It rang once, that was all. But now, it had spoken again. The abbot approached slowly, his bare feet soft against the stone. He raised his hand to the bell, but it no longer moved. It hung still in the warm night air, its bronze surface dull with age, and yet there was a scent, sharp, metallic, like blood rubbed into old coins. No one dared ask why. That night, the monks recited the protective chants twice. At dawn, the sky bloomed orange behind the chedi where Mali's ashes had been placed. Birds circled the spire, but none landed. The wind that passed through the temple was too quiet, like it moved around something it couldn't see. The villagers whispered about the second bell all morning. Some said it was just a gust of wind, though no leaves stirred when it happened. Others believed it was Mali's soul, confused, frightened, lingering too close to the world she had left behind. But But the old woman who sold candles by the temple gate said something else. A bell that rings twice means the soul has turned back. The monks dismissed her. Superstition, they said. The bell had cracked before. Sound carried strangely at night. But when the abbot went to inspect it later, he found no cracks, no breeze, no evidence of movement. Only a faint black fingerprint along the inside rim. And Molly's urn, sealed just hours before, sat beneath the chadi with a single white flower placed atop. That flower, the abbot noticed, had turned its face toward the bell. That evening, a storm gathered over the fields, but it did not rain. And inside the temple grounds, the bell, now covered with a ceremonial cloth, remained silent. Yet every monk could feel it, a pressure in the chest, a listening hum behind the ears, as if something waited, as if something had not yet crossed over. They continued their prayers. And in the abbot's dreams that night, the bell rang again, but this time it rang from under the ground, and someone's voice whispered from beneath the ash, "I wasn't ready." The morning after the bell rang twice, the temple smelled of smoke and wet ash. The air was thick, still clinging to the memory of the fire. Villagers walked past the gates in silence, their eyes lowered, their lips whispering prayers they did not dare finish. Even the dogs kept their distance. Molly's funeral was over. Her ashes had been sealed inside a white urn, her name brushed in gold paint along the side. But those who had seen her body before the cremation could not forget what they had witnessed. Her eyes had never closed. They said she stared through the funeral cloth as if watching the world leave her behind. The monks tried to press her eyelids shut 3 times. Each time they lifted again, slowly, softly, like petals parting to light. The abbot explained it away. "The body resists," he said. "Sometimes the spirit clings to form. It will pass once the fire cleanses it." But the villagers didn't believe him. In the old woman's hut by the river, whispers spread faster than incense smoke. They said Molly died unwillingly, that she had been betrayed before she drowned, that her final breath wasn't prayer, but anger. And anger in death does not vanish, it binds. By noon, her mother came to the temple, clutching a bowl of jasmine in tears. Her face was drawn, her eyes swollen red. She fell to her knees before the abbot, her voice trembling. "Please, Luang Po, she doesn't rest. I dreamed of her standing by my bed. Her hair was still wet. She said, 'I can't find the light.'" The abbot explained it away. "The body resists," he said. "Sometimes the spirit clings to form. It will pass once the fire cleanses it." But the villagers didn't believe him. In the old woman's hut by the river, whispers spread faster than incense smoke. They said Molly died unwillingly, that she had been betrayed before she drowned, that her final breath wasn't prayer, but anger. And anger in death does not vanish, it binds. By noon, her mother came to the temple, clutching a bowl of jasmine in tears. Her face was drawn, her eyes swollen red. She fell to her knees before the abbot, her voice trembling. "Please, Luang Po, she doesn't rest. I dreamed of her standing by my bed. Her hair was still wet. She said, 'I can't find the light.'" The abbot explained it away, but his fingers tightened around the prayer beads in his hand. He told her, "Dreams are the mind's way of grieving. The living hold on, the dead simply echo what we fear to release." But when she looked up at him, he saw something that silenced his own reasoning. Faint gray ash clung to the hem of her skirt, as if she had walked through the cremation ground after the fire. That night, the monks cleaned the pyre. Beneath the blackened logs, a single spot still smoldered, glowing faintly like a dying coal. It refused to go out, no matter how much sand they poured over it. The youngest novice, barely 15, asked the elder if it meant something. The elder only shook his head. It means she still remembers the warmth. At home, Mali's mother could not eat. She left the bowl of jasmine untouched beside the spirit shelf. The candlelight shimmered on the old photographs, Mali smiling in her school uniform, holding a folded offering in her hands, her hair tied neatly back. The mother wept softly, whispering apologies into her palms. She had forbidden her daughter to leave the village. She had warned her not to meet that man again. Now she would have given her own breath to call her back. She dreamed again that night. The same dream. A river without ripples, a boat drifting backward, and Mali standing waist-deep in the water, her white funeral cloth clinging to her skin. She was not crying, she was not afraid, she was simply waiting. When her mother reached for her, Mali opened her eyes. They were still open, still alive. "You burned me before I could speak." Her voice echoed like the toll of a distant bell. The mother awoke, gasping, clutching her chest. The room was dark, except for the candle on the altar. Its flame had bent sideways, though no wind blew. And for a moment, just one faint, impossible heartbeat, she heard the bell again. One ring, then silence. The next day, the abbot went to the cremation ground alone. He took a handful of holy water and sprinkled it across the sand. "May the restless find rest," he murmured. He looked up at the bell. The cloth that covered it had shifted, as if something had brushed against it from inside. He reached out to adjust the fabric. His fingers met the metal. It was warm. The abbot stepped back slowly, and though he stood alone in the open air, he felt the weight of eyes watching him. Eyes that did not blink, eyes that refused to close. He whispered a prayer beneath his breath. "If you are still here, child, may the next chant guide you home." But somewhere deep within the temple walls, a faint vibration began to hum. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the earth. It was the bell, quivering softly, like a throat preparing to speak. That night, a storm swept over the rice fields. The wind tore at the shutters, lightning cracked above the chedi, and rain hissed against the ash mound where Mali's body had burned. The monks prayed through the thunder, but amid the storm's roar, they heard it again, the bell. 2 slow, clear rings, deep, aching, like breath from another world. The abbot arose, heart pounding, and stepped outside with his lantern. The storm wind wrapped around him like a cold hand. He looked toward the bell tower, and in the lightning's brief flash, he saw her, standing beneath the cloth, head tilted upward, eyes shining like wet glass. She was smiling, but not at him. She was smiling at the bell. On the third night, the rain did not come. The sky hung low and breathless, as if afraid to disturb something watching below. Within the temple walls, the air had thickened, not with incense, but with waiting, an invisible tension like the final held note of a chant. The monks avoided the bell tower now. Though it remained cloaked and silent by day, they all heard it pulse at night, a sound that never fully became a ring, but pressed just beneath hearing, as though a soul were knocking on the fabric of silence. In the village, Mali's mother began preparing something of her own. She no longer visited the monks in daylight. Instead, she sought out the one man who had not spoken during the funeral, whose head had remained bowed even after the second ring. His name was Fray Nun, once a fully ordained monk, now a man with no robes and no voice in the temple. He lived beyond the edge of the village, in a hut half swallowed by banana trees. The locals said he had performed a Sai Sian ritual once for a man who died in anger. That man's ashes had gone cold, but his wife's spirit vanished soon after. They called it a curse. Frey Noon called it mercy. When Molly's mother came to him, she brought only 3 things: a bowl of jasmine, her daughter's hairbrush, and a long red thread. She bowed deeply and did not raise her head. "She is not gone," she whispered. "She speaks to me in dreams. Her body burned, but her voice grows louder." Frey Noon said nothing, but when he saw the red thread, he stiffened. Sai Sin, the sacred thread, meant to tie the living and the dead, soul to soul, breath to breath. It was never to be used after cremation. To bind a spirit that lingered was to call it back and possibly trap it. But the look in the mother's eyes was already past caution. "I do not want her to go, not yet." He stared at her a long time, then nodded once. That night, they gathered in the mother's house. No chants, no bells, only silence and the rhythmic drip of a roof leak hitting the clay floor. Frey Noon set the hairbrush on the mat. He tied one end of the red thread to its wooden handle and the other around the mother's left wrist. He lit 3 candles, one for body, one for breath, one for voice. "If she comes, do not speak. If she speaks, do not answer. If the thread grows cold, do not hold tighter." The mother nodded. She would disobey every one of those instructions. The ritual began just after midnight. The candles flickered, but not from wind. The air had shifted, become heavier, slower. The silence thickened until it felt like the house had sunk beneath the ground. Frey Noon closed his eyes and began to chant, not the formal chants of the temple, but older words murmured from the back of the throat, words whose syllables were shaped to call out across the veil. The thread between them twitched, once, then again. The hairbrush moved slightly. The mother gasped, but said nothing. Then she felt it, a pull not from her wrist, but from somewhere deep behind her ribs, as if something inside her was being gently tugged forward. And then, a voice, soft, wet. "Mother." Frey Noon opened his eyes sharply, but said nothing. The candles leaned toward the thread. "You burned me too soon." Her voice had changed. It was lower, slower, as though rising from water. The mother's fingers trembled, but she could not look away. "I wasn't ready." The hairbrush turned. "You left the gate open. He never came." The mother felt tears rise, but not from sorrow, from guilt. The thread got cold. Frey Noon reached to cut it, but before he could, "He lied to me." The mother whispered, unable to stop herself. "Who?" The candles flared, the air dropped 10 degrees, the hairbrush cracked down the middle, and the thread snapped in half, not from the scissors, but from something pulling too hard. A gust of air swept through the house, the candles extinguished, and in that final second of light, they saw her. Just a glimpse. Molly standing in the corner, hair soaked, eyes open, and smiling. When morning came, Frey Noon had vanished. Only his robes remained on the porch, folded neatly, covered in ash. The mother said nothing. She burned the hairbrush. She buried the thread. But that night, she lit another candle and waited for the voice to return. At the temple, the monks found the bell uncovered again. Its cloth lay in the grass, torn cleanly down the middle. And though no one touched it, the bell had moved. It now faced east, toward the house where a red thread had once tied a mother to her dead daughter. And far beneath it, Within the chadi that held Molly's ashes, the gold-painted urn had cracked just enough for something to breathe. The nights grew quieter after the ritual, not with peace, but with a hush that suggested the land was listening. The frogs no longer sang by the canal, the dogs no longer barked at passing shadows, and the wind, once a nightly guest in the swaying palms, seemed to hold its breath. Wat Nong Sai stood beneath the pale moon like a guardian afraid to speak. The bell remained hanging in the eastern pavilion, unmoved, untouched, but every monk who walked past it looked away. Even in daylight, its presence felt heavier than metal. The abbot had considered removing it altogether, but tradition whispered otherwise. The bell was older than the temple, older than the village. It was said to have been cast from a melted idol, one that once sat in a temple that had sunk into the earth during a famine. It had rung for hundreds of souls before Mali, and never in its entire history had it rung more than once for a single death, until now. And now it would not stop calling. It was the novice monk, little Sumet, who heard it first again. He had drawn night duty, sweeping the temple courtyard after the evening chants. The moon was veiled behind thin clouds, casting the temple in a soft, shifting glow. Sumet moved slowly, broom brushing across fallen tamarind leaves, his thoughts drifting somewhere between sleep and prayer. He passed the bell pavilion just before midnight and stopped. A sound, low and long, pressed itself into his bones. Not loud, but thick, like hearing your own breath echoing inside a deep well. He turned toward the bell. It did not move, but the sound was unmistakable. Gong! A single tone, but as it faded, another rose behind it. Gong! Two, just like before. His broom dropped. The wind picked up, just enough to sway the grass, just enough to move the prayer flags at the edge of the wall. He ran. The abbot came to the bell in silence. It had not moved. Its shadow remained exactly where it should be. The striker leaned against the wall, untouched. But something was different. There were footprints, bare, wet and pale, leading up to the pavilion steps. And the ground beneath the bell was damp, as though someone had stood there after walking from the river. The abbot knelt and pressed his hand to the earth. Cold. Not the chill of air, but the deep, old cold of something not meant to rise again. He looked up at the bell and whispered, "Why are you calling her back?" But the bell said nothing. By morning, the temple dogs had fled. All three were found pacing near the village shrine, tails tucked, eyes fixed toward the temple with fear. They would not return, not even for food. The villagers began to worry. When they asked the abbot if the bell had rung again, he did not lie. "It rings for one who did not finish her passage." An elder asked what that meant. "It means she is not dead in memory, and when the memory is louder than the fire, the soul returns." They did not understand, but they feared enough to stay away. On the fifth night, the abbot made a decision. He summoned the monks to the bell tower before dusk. Together, they coated the inside rim of the bell with wax, white, soft, scented with temple oil. The wax would muffle the sound, they said, seal it, silencing the path between worlds. As they worked, a silence fell over the temple,
Not one bird cried, not one leaf stirred. When the sun dipped below the trees, they lit incense and circled the bell, chanting. The elder monk, Fra Tien, recited a protective verse. Let no voice pass but that which seeks release. Let no bell ring but that which guides the departed. As the final chant faded, the abbot tied a white cloth around the striker and laid it in the sacred storeroom where it would not be touched again. The bell was sealed. The monks slept, and for the first time in days, the night held its breath. But at 3:13 a.m., the wax cracked, not with heat, not with touch, but with a vibration that began inside the metal. From something inside. The bell trembled, the wax split, and though no one struck it, gong. Once. Gong. Twice. The abbot awoke to the sound, heart pounding. He rushed barefoot through the temple halls, past the chedi, past the prayer hall. The bell pavilion glowed under the moonlight, and standing beneath it was Molly. Her skin was pale, her feet wet. She wore the same funeral cloth she had been burned in, though no flame had touched it now. Her hair clung to her shoulders like river weeds. Her eyes were open. She looked at the abbot, and she smiled, but not with joy, but with recognition, as though she had heard her name whispered 100 times and was answering. She raised her hand and placed her palm gently against the bell, and the bell wept, not with sound, but with thin trails of soot that rolled down its sides like black tears. The abbot fell to his knees. "Child, why have you come back?" But the girl did not speak, only looked at him. And as the wind shifted, he heard it, a faint whisper in the air. Not hers, his own voice, his own chant from days before, repeated back to him like an echo. "If you are still here, may the next chant guide you home." She had heard him, and she had followed, but not to leave, to stay. The next day, the villagers came to the temple and found the bell covered in ash, not sprinkled, but coated, as if it had been inside a pyre. The abbot did not speak that day. He sat before the bell and wept silently, prayer beads falling through his fingers like sand through a broken hourglass. And in the sky above, the birds flew in circles, but never landed. The chedi stood like a solemn guardian at the heart of Wat Nong Sai. Its base was old stone, worn smooth by rain and time. Inside, beneath a shelf lined with aging urns, sat the vessel that held Molly's ashes, white porcelain, gold lettering, a single crack near the rim. The monks passed it every day on their way to chant, and every day more of them began to look away, not because they feared it, but because they felt it, a presence, like someone sitting too close without touching you, a breath on the back of your neck in an empty room, the unmistakable sense that something inside the urn was not yet still. The abbot, once confident in his rituals, had begun to wake from dreams of fire and water, dreams in which he stood at the edge of the cremation ground, watching Molly's silhouette walk backward into the smoke, only to turn and stare at him with eyes that glowed from within the ash. On the 6th morning, a novice monk reported something strange. "I was sweeping the chedi floor, Lung Po. The urn, it whispered." The abbot frowned.
Wind, perhaps. The stone speaks when it's old. But the novice shook his head. It wasn't wind. It said, "I am not done." Later that afternoon, they opened the chedi for cleaning. The urns were carefully dusted, the candle trays replaced, the incense bowls refreshed. When the abbot approached Molly's urn, he hesitated. He reached out with both hands and touched the ceramic gently. It was warm, not the warmth of sun nor of breath, but of something that should not be. He lifted it slightly. Inside, the ashes shifted, not like dry powder, but like something moving. He froze, and for one terrible heartbeat, he swore he heard it again, a whisper, not in his ears, but in his bones. "You burned my body, not my voice." That night, the chants were longer, slower, spoken twice for every verse. The abbot had instructed them to focus on release, to visualize water returning to river, flame returning to sky, the soul drifting toward rebirth. But the bell no longer rang for guidance. Now the bell rang for memory, and memory was heavy. The youngest monk, Samet, wandered near the cremation grounds after the final prayer. He should not have. Curiosity had nested in him like a seed, fed by dreams and whispers, watered by fear. He walked barefoot across the dark earth, past the charred remains of the pyre, toward the old prayer stump where offerings were once left. He crouched low, and then he heard it. A soft scrape, like fingers combing slowly through ash. He turned his head sharply. Nothing. Then again, scrooch, scrooch. It was coming from the ground beneath the pyre. His throat tightened. The ashes were moving, just faintly, just enough to stir a pattern like the slow breath of someone asleep beneath a blanket of soot. And then, Sa-met. Sa-met. His name, drawn out like a sigh through smoke. He dropped the prayer beads in his hand, ran, didn't stop until the temple gates were behind him, his skin slick with cold sweat. When he told the abbot, the old man only closed his eyes. The fire did not finish its work. By morning, the footprints returned. One set, small, bare, leading from the cremation grounds to the bell pavilion, and from there toward the chedi. The path curved once where no monk ever walked, but it was a path Molly knew. She had walked it 100 times in life, always barefoot, always humming. The abbot returned to the urn alone. He lit a candle and placed it before her name. He bowed 3 times. "Child," he whispered, "what is it you seek?" The candle flickered. The flame bent sideways, and then stilled. A moment passed. Then from inside the urn, a tiny sound. Tap. Then another. Tap. Tap. Like a nangle on ceramic. He leaned closer. The air grew colder. And behind the taps, he heard something else. A hum. Low, female, off-key. The same melody Molly used to hum as a girl when she swept the temple floor before evening prayer. He stepped back, heart shaking. She was not resting. She was remembering. And remembrance, for a soul like hers, was not peace. It was gravity. That night, as the monks slept, a trail of ash appeared across the prayer hall floor, spelling no words, forming no shapes, just a line, a quiet mark, as if someone had walked there wet with memory. The bell did not ring, but in the silence, it pulsed.
Wat Nong Sai had grown silent in ways that silence should not be. Not peaceful, not meditative. This silence had weight, like the air before a monsoon or the breath just before a scream. The birds had fled the grounds, the dogs would not cross the gate, and the novice monks, once full of idle chatter after evening chants, now slept with amulets beneath their pillows and their eyes fixed toward the bell tower. Among them was one who did not sleep at all. His name was Prakit. He was the oldest monk at the temple, not the abbot, but the one who had come before, the one who no longer taught, who no longer spoke. He had taken a vow of silence 7 years ago, after something he had seen during a cremation in another province, something he would not name, something that left his voice behind. He had kept that vow through thunder, through famine, through death, until Mali, until the bell rang twice, and then Prakit began to whisper again. It started with humming, a soft sound in his throat, low and wordless, like someone remembering a lullaby without wanting to. He hummed during morning chores. He hummed during prayer. The younger monks noticed. The abbot noticed. But no one dared ask him why. Then came the drawings. Circles scrawled in chalk on the stone by the cremation grounds. Bell shapes, eyes, water, a figure in white, always drawn facing away. When a novice monk asked him about it, Prakit finally spoke. Only once, only quietly. She walks backwards, so she doesn't forget the way home. They did not understand, not fully, not then. That night, Prakit went to the bell alone. He waited until all others had gone to their mats, until the oil lamps had burned low and the wind no longer moved the prayer flags. He stepped into the pavilion barefoot. The bell loomed above him, massive and unmoving. He did not touch it. He only bowed. Then, slowly, he turned his back to it and knelt, and waited. His eyes open, his breath slow. He did not see her arrive, but he felt it. The air thickened. The space behind him cooled, not like shade, but like shadow. Then, bare feet, the soft pad of soles against stone, not approaching from ahead, but behind. He kept still. She passed on his left, and just before the wind rose, he caught a glimpse, not in the bell's reflection, not in his imagination, but in the space itself. A girl in white, hair dripping though the air was dry, eyes open wide, walking slowly, backwards. She did not glance at him. She did not speak. She only moved, one step at a time, backwards across the stone, as if retracing every path she had ever walked, from life to death, and now to something else. She stopped in front of the bell and placed her hand on it. The bell did not ring, but it throbbed, a soundless tremor that rippled through the air like breath pressed against skin. Prakit whispered, barely a breath, "What do you want, child?" And for the first time in years, he heard a voice answer him directly. It was not angry, not mournful. It was tired. "I want him to hear me." Then she was gone. Just like that. No breeze, no footsteps, just silence again. But when Prakit turned toward the bell, he saw something left behind. A small smudge on the bronze, a handprint, delicate and wet and cold. The next morning he called the abbot. They stood beneath the bell together. Neither spoke at first. Then the abbot said, "You vowed never to speak of what you saw." Prakit nodded. "I still won't speak of that." The abbot turned toward him slowly. "But you'll speak of this." A pause. Then, "Yes." And so Prakit told the abbot what he had seen: the backward walking, the hand on the bell, the whisper. She wants him to hear her. The abbot's face darkened. "You mean the boy?" Prakit nodded. They both knew who he meant. The one who left the village the night she died. The one whose name Molly still mouthed in dreams. The one who had not come to the funeral. That evening, the abbot summoned the novice monks. "Find him. Bring him home. If her memory is louder than her death, he is the one who still holds it." And that night, the bell rang again. Just once. But this time, it did not echo. It hummed. And in Prakit's empty room, the chalk drawings had shifted. The girl in white had turned slightly. Now she was facing the viewer, and her smile was gone. No soul in Thai tradition is sent off without prayer. Chants are the current on which the dead are carried toward peace. But when a chant is spoken once and the soul does not leave, the monks must gather again to speak the second time, not to guide, but to sever. At Wat Nong Sai, the decision was not made lightly. 7 nights had passed since Molly was burned. 7 nights since the bell rang twice. 7 nights of whispers, footprints, and ash. The abbot gathered the monks beneath the old Bodhi tree. The roots of the tree curled over cracked stone like fingers clutching secrets. Here, long ago, monks had performed the chanting of severance, a rare ritual used only when a soul remained too closely tethered to the living. It was not meant for punishment, it was meant for release. But sometimes release feels like abandonment. The abbot's voice was quiet. "We will chant for her again, not to invite, not to speak with, but to unbind." The monks bowed, but not all were convinced this was what she wanted. The villagers gathered beyond the outer gate. No one crossed the threshold. They lit candles and placed them along the stone wall. Some left food, water, flowers, silent offerings for a girl they once knew. Children were told to cover their eyes during the chanting. "If you see the spirit shadow," the elder warned, "you might mistake it for your own." The chanting began just after sundown. 14 monks, 14 verses, each word drawn out like a silk thread pulled from a wound. The abbot led, voice steady, hands pressed tightly in prayer. Behind them, the funeral pyre remained cold, but the air around it pulsed, slow and heavy, like a second heartbeat beneath the earth. White lotuses were placed in a circle around Molly's urn. As the verses deepened, the wind began to swirl, not violently, but inward, as though something was drawing the air toward itself. The candles flickered, the cloth over the bell rustled, and then the flowers began to wilt, not from heat, not from time, but from presence. Halfway through the second verse of Severance, a child began to cry near the temple gate. Her mother held him tightly, whispering, "It's only the chanting."
But the child wept harder, pointing toward the bell pavilion. "She's in there! She's standing inside the bell!" The villagers froze. The mother pressed her hand to the boy's eyes, but it was too late. He had seen. Inside, the chanting reached its final stanza. The abbot's voice began to tremble. One of the elder monks suddenly fell backward, gasping. His hands clawed at the ground. His eyes were wide. "She touched me. Her fingers are cold, but they're real." The others pulled him from the circle. The chant continued. The bell groaned, not rung, but stretched, like metal resisting the pressure of silence. And then, gong. Once. It rang without a hand, without a breath. Gong. Twice. The monks stopped, but the bell continued to vibrate long after the sound had faded. The abbot rose. "Finish the chant," he said. "She must hear it all." As the final words were spoken, the wind stopped, the candles stilled, and for a moment there was only quiet. Not peace, but the kind of quiet that comes after a scream, a deep breath held in the dark. After the ceremony, the abbot walked alone to the chetty. He placed his palm on Molly's urn. It was no longer warm, no longer shifting, just still. But he could not shake the feeling that stillness was not the same as absence. He turned back toward the temple and saw a figure near the bell tower. She stood there, unmoving, hair long, skin pale, wrapped in white cloth that fluttered in a wind that no longer blew. She didn't enter the temple, she only watched. And in her gaze he saw not malice, but disappointment, like a daughter left behind in a room full of strangers speaking in a language she could no longer understand. Then she stepped backward into shadow and disappeared. By morning, the white lotuses had rotted to black. The candle wax had hardened in strange shapes, knotted, curled, like hands, and a soft humming sound echoed through the hollow of the bell. Not music, not voice, just memory.
The rain returned 3 nights after the second chanting. Not with thunder, not with storm, but with a drizzle that clung to the village roofs like silk threads unraveling from the sky. It soaked the wooden steps, it whispered through the banana leaves, and it carried something strange with it. Ash. Not soot from a fire, not dust from the fields, but fine, bone-pale ash that clung to windows, to doors, to thresholds, like a message left in silence. It began at Malie's mother's house. She opened the door at dawn and found a small pile at her feet, shaped in a soft crescent, as though someone had knelt there. No footprints, no marks, only the ash. She swept it away, but the next morning it returned, thicker, and this time she found a single strand of hair lying atop it, still damp. By the 4th day, 3 other homes had received the same gift. Each one had belonged to someone from Molly's life, her childhood friend Suni, the grocer who gave her sweets as a girl, the old teacher who used to plait her hair. Each found ash upon their doorstep, cool to the touch, fine as flour and smelling faintly of river smoke. Suni tried to burn incense for protection, but the sticks would not stay lit. The teacher tried to scrub the wood clean, but the ash left a shadow behind, one shaped like 2 bare feet. The grocer simply closed his door and prayed. She's walking the village again, not to haunt, but to be remembered. The monks were summoned by frightened villagers. The abbot arrived in silence. He crouched beside the ash at Suni's door, ran his fingers through it, and held them to the light. There, barely visible, were the tiny flecks of bone, the color of salt. He did not speak for a long while. When he did, his voice was soft. She is leaving pieces of herself where her name was once spoken with kindness. This is not vengeance. This is presence. But presence, when it lingers too long, becomes disturbance. Back at the temple, the monk who had performed the second chanting, the one who had spoken the final syllable, fell ill. His lips turned gray, his breath grew shallow, and when the abbot sat beside him to offer prayers, the monk whispered, "She touched my tongue." He died the next morning. During his cremation, the fire hissed and smoked, but did not burn clean. The ashes from his pyre turned the color of Molly's hair. And when the bell rang, just once during the final chant, a trail of footprints appeared in the sand, heading toward the Chedi. That same night, Suni awoke to a sound outside her window. Not footsteps, not chanting, just humming. A tune she hadn't heard in years. Molly's voice, soft, tuneless, the way she used to sing to herself while drawing lotus petals in the dirt behind the school. Suni sat up. "Molly!" The humming stopped. A silence, thick and waiting, settled into the room. She approached the window slowly, pushed the shutter open. The rain had stopped. The moon was high, and in the yard below, there stood a figure, wrapped in white, hair hanging wet, eyes wide and watching. Suni gasped, but not in fear, in recognition. "You shouldn't be here." But Molly did not move. She simply raised one hand and pointed toward the temple. Then, in the blink of a breath, she was gone. No sound, no motion, only ash where her feet had stood. Suni went to the temple at dawn. She found the abbot sweeping the bell pavilion. He looked tired, older. His shoulders carried the weight of unanswered prayers. "She came to me. She pointed here. She's not angry. She's trying to say something." The abbot nodded slowly. "She has become the echo of her own memory. The longer we refuse to hear it, the louder she will ring." That evening, the bell was coated in fresh soot, not from the air, from touch, like 5 long streaks down its side, like fingers dragged gently down the metal face, and across the temple steps. Ash. Always ash. The monks stopped sweeping it. The villagers stopped questioning it. And the abbot, once firm in ritual, now left the doors of the prayer hall open at night. Not for her to enter, but so that if she walked by, she would not feel unwelcome. The temple had grown dim in spirit, not because its candles burned less brightly, but because the light no longer reached the corners. It flickered in hesitation, afraid to stretch toward places where memory had rooted itself. Each night, the monks gathered for evening chants in the main hall. The incense smoke curled upward like questions never answered. The prayers were steady, measured, but thinner than before, like thread worn down from too much use. And above them, just beyond the door, the bell remained still, silent, but never absent. It had not rung in 3 nights, and yet its weight hung over the monks' voices like a shadow they could not name. On the 9th night, the abbot lit a candle himself. It was tradition for the eldest monk to light the first flame before the chanting began. This candle was not ordinary. It had been carved from sacred wax, infused with camphor and herbs, meant to purify the air and calm lingering spirits. He held the flame close to his chest, whispered a silent blessing, and placed it before Molly's urn in the chedi. The wax pooled gently. The flame stood tall, and the chanting began. The monks' voices wove through the air, layered and soft, like wind through trees. They chanted for peace. They chanted for release. They chanted for forgetting. But as they reached the verse that names the dead, the air changed. It thickened, slowed. The room grew colder, first at the edges, then at the core. One monk shivered, another faltered on a word. The abbot continued. He spoke her name. Molly, daughter of May Urai. And in that moment, the candle flickered once, twice, then out, extinguished, not blown, not burned down, but taken, as though something leaned forward and kissed it away. The chants fell silent. The room held its breath. No one moved. Then from the corner of the chedi came a sound, soft, delicate, like fingers running lightly along a stone wall. 3 taps, not from outside, from within. The abbot turned slowly toward the urn. The crack near its rim had widened, not shattered, but split just enough to suggest pressure, movement. The air around it smelled of damp cloth and smoldered jasmine, and on the floor below the pedestal, ash. A perfect circle of it. The monks relit the candle with trembling hands. This time it burned lower, more reluctant. The chanting resumed, but quieter, more uncertain. The younger monks could not stop glancing at the urn, and none of them noticed the bell, just outside, sway ever so slightly without wind. That same night, a lay disciple who cleaned the temple grounds fell ill. He claimed to have heard singing near the bell tower, soft and tuneless like a child's lullaby. He said, "She was under the roof, just standing, and her mouth was moving, but the sound wasn't coming from her." He couldn't explain what that meant, only that it had filled his chest with sorrow so deep he had to lie down on the path and cry, without knowing why. The next morning, he left the village. He would not return. In the days that followed, the candle would not stay lit for more than a few minutes. No matter how many times they replaced the wick, no matter how strong the flame was at the start, it always died before her name was spoken. And with each extinguishing, the crack in the urn grew. Hairline fractures like spiderwebs under the glaze. One monk swore he heard breathing. Another claimed the wax dripped upward once. The abbot said nothing, but he began preparing for something. On the 11th night, he placed a bowl of water beside the candle, a test, a reflection, a mirror for the unseen. The candle lit. The chant began. Her name was spoken. The candle went out, and in the still water, the monks saw a face, not clear, not complete, just eyes, open, watching, not with rage, not with sorrow, with expectation. The abbot stood. He faced the urn, and for the first time he did not chant. He asked, "Molly, what is it that you need to leave?" No sound answered, but the candle beside him sparked to life on its own, and the reflection in the water smiled. When a body is cremated, it is meant to become light, ash to scatter, smoke to rise, bone to vanish into memory. But on the 11th day after Molly's cremation, a crack in her urn revealed what the fire could not consume. A monk, tasked with sealing the split, poured the contents into a fresh vessel under the abbot's watchful eye. The ash was pale, fine, and still warm from within. But as the final pinch of powder slid down, something clinked against the bottom. Not clay, not stone. Bone. A single finger bone. Long, clean, unburned, perfectly preserved, and wrapped tightly around it, bound like a secret kept too long, was a red thread. Frayed, knotted, still faintly damp. The abbot did not speak at first. He simply stared at the bone, then at the thread, then at the urn, as though seeing finally the true shape of what remained. He said, "This is the tether. This is what she clings to." The monks gathered around him like shadows. They recognized the thread. Sai-sin, forbidden for the dead after cremation, used only to bind memory, to summon, to trap, or worse, to promise. In Thai funerary belief, bones are not just remnants of the body. They are houses, small, brittle shelters for whatever remains unfinished in the soul. When one piece resists the fire, it does not mean defiance. It means the soul has left something unsaid, something that keeps it pacing between the worlds. And the red thread? That is vow, spoken or unspoken, a vow never released. The abbot lifted the bone carefully. The thread twitched in his hand, not from wind. There was no wind. It moved like something breathing beneath it. He turned to the monks. This must be severed, not with blades, but with truth. That night the abbot visited Molly's mother. She answered the door already crying. "I never meant to keep her," she whispered. "I only wanted one more moment, just one." The abbot showed her the bone, the thread. "Did you tie this?" Her lips trembled. "No." A pause. Then she did. It had been years ago. Molly had tied the red thread around her finger during her last days with the boy who would later vanish. A small gesture, a silent vow between lovers. He had promised to return. She had promised to wait. The thread was hidden in her drawer, found after her death, tucked with dried flowers and a folded letter she never sent. Her mother, in her grief, had placed it with her body, thinking it would comfort her, thinking it would help her find peace. But instead, it became a chain, a loop that held her to memory, to him, to this world. Back at the temple, the abbot prepared the altar. He placed the bone on a white cloth, lit 3 candles, one for her life, one for her death, one for the truth between them. And as the flame danced, he called out softly, "Molly, if you are still bound by this thread, we will speak what was never said." That same night the man who had left the village returned, not by choice, but by guilt. He had heard the bell in his dreams, felt the ash at his doorstep in the city, seen her eyes, wide, wet, waiting in reflections that vanished too soon. He came to the temple barefoot, with no offering, only sorrow, only silence. When he stepped into the hall, the candles flickered violently. The bone shivered on the cloth, and the thread curled tighter around it. The abbot motioned for him to speak. He stepped forward, fell to his knees, and whispered, "I loved her. I left because I was afraid, and I never said goodbye. I never let her go." The thread twitched, then unwound, slowly, like fingers releasing a memory. The knot loosened, and the bone, once heavy, turned to dust in a single breath of wind. No chanting, no cry, just a long exhale from the air itself, as though the soul had been holding it in for too long. The candles burned clean, the shadows softened, and the bell, for the first time in nights, remained still. Not silenced, not asleep, just still. At dawn, the abbot swept the altar. He found no ash, no thread, only a faint circle of warmth where the bone had lain, and in the sky above, a flock of birds circled the chedi. They did not fly away. They landed, as though something sacred had finally passed through. He returned with his head bowed and his name forgotten, not because no one remembered him, but because he no longer remembered himself as he had been. The boy who laughed with Molly beneath the tamarind tree. The boy who swore he would marry her once the harvest came. The boy who left without saying goodbye. His name was Ek, but even that felt strange in his mouth now. The villagers did not greet him. They watched from behind curtains, unsure whether to see him as a man who came back from guilt or a man who dragged something back with him. Because the night he arrived, the bell rang in the dark, not once, not twice, but 3 times, and that had never happened before. Ek stayed in the house his uncle had left behind. It was near the edge of the village, near the canal where Molly once gathered lilies in the afternoons. He did not light candles. He did not visit the temple. He simply sat, alone, in the room that still smelled of dust and memory. At night, he heard her, not her voice, but her breath. The sound of someone lying beside him, not quite touching, breathing, slow, steady, too real to be imagined. He never looked, because he feared what he already knew. The abbot came to him on the 3rd evening. He did not bring incense. He did not ask questions. He only said, "You must speak her name." Ek shook his head. "I can't. If I do, she'll come." The abbot looked at him. "She already has." Ek told the story slowly, as though the words were rotting wood pulled from his mouth. He had promised her a future, but he feared poverty, feared being tied to this village. So when his father arranged a job in the city,
He took it. He left at night. No letter, no farewell, no thread cut, just silence. And on the morning she was found in the canal, his name was still the last one she had spoken aloud, the last one her mother had heard. In the city, he felt the weight of her everywhere, in puddles that rippled when no one passed, in mirrors that fogged with no breath, in bells that rang in temples blocks away, always two soft chimes echoing across his windows. At first, he ignored them. Then he buried them. Then he fled. But grief has no border, and karma has no gate. When he came back, he brought no luggage, only the red mark on his wrist where the saisin had once been tied, the same thread she had wrapped around his finger in the tall grass near the temple. "You'll come back, right? Even if I'm not here?" He smiled, but never answered. And now every silence he'd offered was returning to him. That night the bell rang again. Ek sat alone, staring at the candle he could not light. He whispered, "Molly." The air shifted. The candle flared to life, and across the room the wooden floor creaked. He turned, slowly, and saw her. Not as he remembered, not in pain, but in pause, wrapped in the white cloth of the dead. Hair clinging to her face like roots under water. Her eyes were not angry. They were open, tired, as though waiting for him to finish something he'd left undone. He stood, his knees weak. "I'm sorry." Her mouth did not move, but the air trembled, as if the room itself held breath. He stepped closer, one step, then two, and with the third, she vanished, leaving only ash on the floor and a trail of wet footprints leading to the door. At dawn, he walked to the temple. The bell was already ringing. Once, twice, and when he reached it, 3. The abbot stood nearby, hands folded. "She heard you, but she is not done listening." Ek fell to his knees. For the first time in years he wept like a child, and the bell above him began to hum, not in anger, not in warning, but in recognition, as though the name she had once whispered under the water had finally been returned to her. Dreams are supposed to offer escape, a gentle place, a space where the dead are quiet and memory softens into forgiveness. But for Ek, sleep was no longer his own. It belonged to her now, to Molly, to the girl who once sang to river lilies and now waited beneath the sound of bells. The first dream came the night after he spoke her name. He stood in the temple courtyard, but everything was submerged. The trees drifted like weeds underwater. The bell swayed gently, casting ripples instead of echoes. And at the center of it all, Molly, not walking, floating. Her eyes were open, but there was no color in them, just ash, just stillness. She did not speak, but the bell rang above her, one long, low tone that passed through bone instead of air. And then a second. Ek reached toward her, but before he touched her, she opened her mouth, and water poured out, dark, endless, cold. He woke gasping, his pillow soaked, not from sweat, but from something colder, thicker. His fingers trembled, and beneath his bed, ash. Again. The next night, the dream returned. This time, she stood beneath the bell, but her back was turned. Each time he stepped closer, the bell tolled, warning him. Each toll slowed his steps, made his legs heavy, like wading through sorrow. "I'm here," he called. "I said your name. I'm not leaving again." She lifted her hand and pointed to the ground. There, beneath the bell, lay a small red box. He didn't recognize it, but she did. She had once carved it for him, when they were children, when the world was still gentle. Inside had been letters, little vows. Now it was filled with ash. He reached to open it, and the bell rang again, a third time, so loud it split the dream apart. He woke screaming, blood on his fingertips from where his nails had dug into his palms while he slept. On the third night, Ek did not want to sleep. He drank bitter tea. He sat in silence. He tried to pray, but the words tasted hollow. By midnight, his eyes could no longer resist. Sleep took him like a tide. In the dream, the temple was gone. Only the bell remained, hanging in a field of salt, white, cracked, endless. Molly stood beside it, not facing him, but facing the bell, as though waiting for it to speak first. Ek called her name. She did not turn. He stepped forward. The bell rang once. She flinched. He stepped again. The bell rang twice. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. And then he understood. The bell was her voice now, and every time it rang, it was her crying out with words she was not allowed to say. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. The wind picked up. The salt blew around him like ash. She turned finally. Her eyes met his, and she whispered, not with sound, but with motion. Her lips moved just enough to shape two syllables. "Finish it." Ek woke before dawn, and this time he knew what he had to do. He went to the old shed behind his uncle's house, searched until his fingers bled, and at the very back, wrapped in old cloth, he found it, the red box. It still bore the scratch of her initials carved beside his. It had been locked. He never opened it after he left. He couldn't bear to. But now, as the morning light crept across the floor, he unlatched the lid. Inside, faded letters, dried jasmine petals, and a single photo of them together, smiling beside the bell tower. He wept, softly, like rain after drought. And as he wept, the bell rang in the distance, not in dreams, but here, now, awake. He walked barefoot to the temple, the box in his hands. The monks watched from the steps, but said nothing. The abbot stood waiting beneath the bell. Ek offered the box in silence. The abbot placed it at the foot of the bell and lit incense. Together they prayed. And when Ek whispered her name one final time, the bell rang, but just once. Not from within, not from dream, not from the dead, but from release. And in the sky above, a single strand of red thread floated gently down. It landed on the altar and curled like a vow finally undone.
Some chants are meant to open doors, others to close them.
But the rarest chant is the one that ends something neither fully opened nor fully closed. A chant for the between, for the half left, the half loved, the half burned. On the 14th night since the fire, the abbot declared the final ritual, not of release, not of severance, but of return. Return of the name to silence, return of the memory to water, return of the vow to wind. We will chant twice, he told the monks, once for her soul, once for the echo that refused to fade. The village gathered in silence, not out of fear now, but reverence, curiosity. The air itself seemed thinner, as though every breath passed through unseen hands. The altar was built beside the bell, not at the chedi, not by the cremation ground, but beneath the very place where the toll first echoed too far. The red box was placed at its center. Beside it, the last of the candle wax, the final lotus bloom, the only photograph of her that remained. Eyes open, mouth almost smiling, a face not yet forgotten, but no longer reaching. The monks took their places, robes pressed smooth, heads bowed low, and as dusk folded the sky into soft blackness, the first chant began. It was old, older than the temple, older than any monk living. Words not spoken often, not because they were forbidden, but because they were final. The first chant moved like a river over stone. It named her gently, Mali, daughter of Urai, soul once washed in temple water, now scattered across memory. They called her home, not to stay, but to gather what remained of herself and prepare to move forward. Each syllable rang like a bell with no sound, and as the chant reached its end, the bell above them trembled just once. Not a ring, not a groan, but a soft vibration, like agreement, like understanding. They paused, let the silence fall, let the night listen. Then began the second chant. This chant was for the living, for those who said her name too often, for those who said it not enough. It was for her mother who bound her with thread, for Ek who left her with silence, for the abbot who failed to guide her, for the village who whispered her death as gossip, not grief. This chant was slower, heavier. Each word fell like ash from a burning vow. The wind rose as they spoke, the trees swayed, the candles flickered backward, and then the bell rang, once, then again, but not like before. This time it rang softly, like a sigh, like someone letting go. The abbot lifted the red box in both hands. He opened it, removed each letter, each folded promise, each petal. He placed them one by one into a clay bowl, lit them with the final flame, and watched them burn, not with smoke, but with peace. The ashes did not scatter, they settled, like memory choosing its place in the past. As the fire dimmed, the abbot whispered, "You are no longer called. You are no longer waiting. You may now go where bells do not follow." The bell stopped ringing. The wind fell still. The photograph on the altar curled at the edge and then lay flat. And in that silence, they knew. She was gone. Not erased, not forgotten, just gone. The soul no longer lingered, the echo no longer circled, the name no longer needed to be spoken, because now it had been heard. That night, the temple slept without prayer. The candles burned evenly, the lotus petals did not wilt, and beneath the bell, no footprints appeared. Years passed, and like all stories too heavy to carry, the tale of Molly became lighter. People stopped whispering about the bell. Children played again near the temple steps. The monks swept ash without fear, and yet no one ever struck the bell again, because they no longer had to. The abbot aged quietly. His hair thinned, his voice softened. His eyes grew more distant, as though watching something only he could still see. But he never left Wat Nong Sai, not because he was afraid, but because he had heard the bell ring from within the silence of his own breath, and knew that some sounds never truly stop. They only move inward. They echo in the bones. One morning, after the final rains of the season, the monks found him sitting beneath the bell pavilion, still, smiling, gone. A candle burned beside him, unlit, but warm. The bell above him had not rung, but the wax of the old thread had melted again, soft, like something once bound returning to water. The monks did not replace the abbot, not immediately. They left his robe folded on the altar. They left his sandals by the door, and they left the bell untouched. But 1 week later, they did something no one expected. They melted it, melted the bell, not to destroy it, but to change it. They took the metal and poured it into a mold, not of a bell, but of a bowl, a water vessel, to be placed beside the chedi, to catch rain, to reflect light, to hold silence. The villagers came to see it. They bowed their heads not in fear, but in reverence, the kind of reverence that comes after grief is heard, after the name has been sung until it rests. They placed white lotus petals in the bowl, and when the wind passed over it, it made no sound, but the petals stirred. Still, on certain nights, when the sky is too quiet and the clock reads 3:13 a.m., those who live near the temple claim they hear something, not a bell, not exactly, a hum, soft, low, carried on the wind, like a memory remembering itself, like a girl walking barefoot between one world and the next, singing a song without sound. They say if you rise and look toward the temple on such nights, you won't see her, but you might feel the air grow heavy, like someone standing beside you who no longer wants to speak, just be known. And if you press your ear close enough to the bowl, they say you can still hear the final echo, the last toll, not of sorrow, not of longing, but of peace, the sound of a promise finally released.